Leute, ihr Rav, der Rebbe, zu lohn Hilchot הבחירה, in den Zven Amatzorim, ויהיה דעת בחושב in German, השליח, מונטריאול, הרב החוסית, הרב, רפאל ווילמובסקי, is going to give us some insights into Hilchot הבחירה, as the Rav, the Rebbe, to keep tzedakah b'tzibur, also in honor, in the days of Zven Amatzorim, הרב ווילמובסקי, בבקשה.
All right. Tonight's discussion, we're going to talk about the first Mishnah, Masechtas Midas. Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph, the Mishnah says, "V'shleishim ekaymes hayu hakohanim shomrim." In 3 places, the Kohanim would guard, would watch the Beis Hamikdash. Levim in 21 places. And then the Mishnah explains, 5 of the Levim would be shomer on the 5 gates of the Azara. Chamisha Shari Azara. Okay, that's Mishnah Aleph. We come to Mishnah Daled, the same Perek. The Mishnah says, how many gates were there in the Beis Hamikdash? I'm sorry, in Azara. 7 gates. So the Gemara asks the obvious question. The first Mishnah says 5 gates. The second Mishnah says 7 gates. How do you reconcile with this? So the Gemara says Abaye and Rava both give an explanation. Abaye says that there were 7 gates. There were 7 gates. 5 of those gates were watched. Only 5. Why? Because the other 2 gates didn't need to have Shmirah. The Kohanim and Beis HaNitzutz and Beis HaMekid, which were very close to those 2 gates, covered those gates for Shmirah. That's the answer of Abaye. Rava says it's a Machlokes Tanoim. The Mishnah and Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph, Mishnah Dalet are actually a Machlokes. One Tana, the first Mishnah holds there was only 5 gates. And the Mishnah in Mishnah Dalet holds there were 7 gates. Okay, that's the Gemara. Now, the Rambam paskins in Hilchos Abchira like this. There were 7 gates in the Beis Hamikdash. There were 7 gates. And from those 7 gates, only 5 of them were watched. Why? Like the answer of Abaye. The answer of Abaye. Because 2 of them were already taken care of by Beis HaNitzutz and Beis HaMekid, the Kohanim over there. The Rebbe asks, the Machlokes Abaye and Rava, we know, famous klal, halachas like Rava, besides for 6 cases, the Al Kadam. So why over here does the Rambam paskin like Abaye, like Abaye, that there were 7 gates. Elamai, only 5 of them were guarded. That's the question of the Rebbe. Okay. So to understand this, the Rebbe goes into a very simple question. The question is, in the Beis HaMikdash, how do you have, according to Rava, the Rebbe looks into the Pirush HaMishnayos of the Rambam. And the Rambam writes like this in Pirush HaMishnayos that according to Rava also there was 7 gates. According to the second Mishnah Daled, even according to that, I'm just giving you according to the Pirush HaMishnayos, just giving you the bottom line. The Rambam Pirush HaMishnayos writes that even according to the Tana of the second Mishnah, Mishnah Daled, which says that there were 7 gates, it's not pshat that they watched in all 7 gates. They watched the 5 out of the 7 gates. So what's the argument according to Abaye and Rava? What's the Tanoim according to Rava? If according to the first Mishnah, there was only 5 gates, and all those 5 gates they watched. According to the second Mishnah, Mishnah Daled, there was Taka 7. There was Taka only watched 5, but there was 7, but they only watched 5. So again, according to everyone, L'Kuli Alma, according to Rava's Tfisa, L'Kuli Alma, there was only 5 gates being watched. Nobody holds that there were 7 gates being watched. There was only 5. So according to this beer of the Rambam Perish Mishnayos, we can understand why the Rambam paskins like Rava, like Abaye. Because even according to Rava, everybody agrees that there's only shmir of the 5 gates. There was never shmir to more. And therefore, the Rambam says there were 7 gates. Because that's like the Rambam says, that's Roiv Chachmei Yisrael agree to that. That's the first Mishnah. How many gates were watched? That everybody agrees was only 5. Okay. That's how the Rebbe explains why we paskin like Abaye, because we're not. We're not paskin like Abaye. According to everyone, Sai according to Rava, and Sai according to Abaye, there was only 5 gates being watched. The question was, how many gates were there? Were there 5 or were there 7? Okay. But now comes a question like this. Rava, in Rava's Shitta, that there were, how the Rambam just saw from the Pirush Mishnayos, that everybody agrees that there were only 5 gates being watched. The question and the machlekes between the two Mishnayos is how many gates there are. Why do we have to make this machlekes? Why doesn't Rava say, very simply, that even the second Mishnah, in Mishnah Dalet, that says there were 7 gates. I'm sorry, the first Mishnah, which says 5 gates, it means 5 gates are being watched. Why does Rava take on this path of understanding that there's a machlekes, how many gates there are? We know that you're not supposed to lafushim machlekes leimafshinun to make a machlekes just like that. You could have answered very simply, like what Rava said. Here was 5 being watched, and here was how many gates there are? 7. So Rebbe says, to understand this, we have to first be makdam a question, a very simple question. The Mishnah starts off by saying that there was 7 gates. The second Mishnah, there were 7 gates. And then it counts the 7 gates. But the question is, when Yana Lamali, why do you have to tell us there's 7? We're going to read the Mishnah, we know there's 7. Why does the Mishnah say 7 gates? Shiva Sharim. Why? And the Rebbe explains like this. That be'emes there's no machlekes in Metzias. You can't say there's a machlekes in Metzias how many gates there were. That the second Mishnah holds that there were 7, the first Mishnah says there's 5. It's impossible to say such a thing. We know there's no such thing as a machlekes in Metzias. Everybody agrees that there was 13 gates in the Azara. That's what it says. There's another opinion which says 13, 8, a whole bunch of different numbers. There's no machlekes in Metzias how many gates there were. There were this amount of doorways you could have went through. The question is, and the machlekes is, what could you consider a shar in halacha? What's considered a gate? And there's nafkaminis. If you say just a pathway they could go through, but doesn't have the din of a shar, so then there's a question about going to the Beis Hamikdash when somebody is tamei. If he goes through a gate that's not really a shar, he's potter because it's not derech biyah. Another nafkamina would it be in the discussion of mezuzah? The Gemara says has a whole limud that the sha'arim of the Beis Hamikdash are potter, but if it's not a shar, it's potter. So the Rebbe says that there is no machlekes metzias. Everybody agrees there was 13. The question is, with the whole machlekes and the tanoim, how many there were, is how many could you consider a shar according to halach? And obviously, where does that now? What's the nafkina that we're discussing tonight? Where does it come out the most? That we're talking about is about the chiyuv of shmira. If you hold that it's a gate that has a din of a shar, then you need to have shmir on it. If you say it's not a gate, it's not a shar, it's not I don't want to say what you would call it, then it doesn't need a din of shmira. And that is the machlekes in the two mishnayos. Whether there were 7 gates or 5 gates doesn't mean how many space in the wall was there. if that space that was open is considered a gate, and therefore needs shmira. According to the first Mishnah, again, it's all in Rava, it's 5. According to the second Mishnah, it's 7. So and this we can explain the Rambam, before we get to answer Rava, this we can explain the Rambam. The Rambam writes that there was 5 gates, and Chamisha Sharim, and the Leviim were shomer in those 5 gates, and the Kohanim would take care from Beis HaNitzah to Beis HaMoked, the Sha'arim of those Beis HaNitzah to Beis HaMoked. They ever ask, why do we have to stress, why do we have to underline this point, that Beis HaNitzah to Beis HaMoked, the Kohanim would watch their Sha'arim. The Kohanim would watch from the inside, from Beis HaNitzah to Beis HaMoked. Why does Rambam say the word, they would watch the Sha'arim of the Beis HaNitzah to Beis HaMoked? Because this is, the Rambam is pointing out, the reason why they're chayiv in Shmira is because they're a shar. The whole reason why the discussion of Shmira starts by these exact shiurim and not by the other ones, because they have a din of a shar. So according to this, we can explain why Rava holds as a machlekes tanoim. And the Mishnah, the first Mishnah says there was only 5. And the second Mishnah says there was only 2. And not that everybody agrees that there were 7. The question is whether or not, how many Leviim were shomer, how many gates there were shomer. Because if you look at the Mishnah, in the second Mishnah, the Lashon is Chamisha Sharim Hayula. There was only 5 Sharim. No mention of any other Shar. No mention of any other Shar. Comes out that the other 2 Sharim, according to that Mishnah, was not a Shar. So you don't have a chiyuv of Shmira on it at all. Again, it's not pshat that there were 7 Sharim and those 2 Sharim already covered by the Kohanim watching in the Beis HaMoked. The Mishnah clearly says in the second Mishnah that there was only 5 Sharim. And that's why Rav has to explain that what's taka the beer, why? There's no Shmira, there's only in 5 because there's a machlekes tanoim. Okay, that's for that. We have more time?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're looking at another discussion, Hilchos Beis HaBchira, regarding the din of Maika. The Mishnah in Maseches Midas, Perek Beis, Mishnah Dalet, if I'm not mistaken, discusses that there was a Maika, there was a gate on top of the Beis HaMikdash. Okay? So why a gate? Why was there a gate? Why was there a Maika? So the Sifri writes, in the halachas of Maika, which are coming up soon, Pashas Kiseitze, says the Sifri, Bayis, Kisibne Bayis, L'Rabis es HaHeichel. The chiyuv of Maika applies to Heichel. And all the Mefarshim ask, what's going on over here? A chiyuv of a Maika on a Heichel? If when it comes to Beis HaMikdash, Beis HaKnesses, and Beis HaMedrash, we have a clear halacha, clear ruling, that Maika doesn't apply to Shul, so for sure Beis HaMikdash shouldn't have the din of a Maika. So there are those that they erase this part of the Sifrei. They say it's it's a mistake, whatever. It's not, they erase it. But you can't say that. It doesn't take that approach. So it's in Ksav Yad, this is the Sifri. Sever writes like this. Sever says, Sever first brings the Rogat Shavar, 2 answers. Sever doesn't like that either. Sever says like this: what's the reason why a chiyuv of a Maika is potter by a shul, by Beis HaKnesses? Because there's no bailim. There's no bailim. By a shutfis, by a house which 2 people own, the halacha is they do have to make a Maika. Why? The pasuk says it has to be your house, but because since both of them own it, then both of them has to take part of the responsibility of kiyipel hanoifel. Somebody has shown falls, so therefore you have to take care of it. A shul, on the other hand, there's no one to take responsibility for. The lashon of Rashi is even somebody across the sea, even a yam is his shul also. That's the halacha, and therefore everyone is responsible. No one's responsible. Nobody has the chiyuv. Nobody can't put anyone. You can't pin down and say this is your responsibility. He doesn't have enough of a bailos that it should be his. However, the Beis Hamikdash, the Rebbe says, belonged to every single Jew. David HaMelech bought Gerdin Aranova from every Yid, collected money from every Shevet, and went out. It was a fundraiser, and everyone paid their part from the from the Shvatim. They paid for the Beis Hamikdash. Comes out that every single Yid has a chelik in the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore every single Yid has a responsibility, a cherayis to build a Maikah. It's his responsibility that nobody should fall. But now there's another issue which comes up. There's a din that if it's not a beis dira, if you have a house, we don't live there, it's not roy ledira, it's not appropriate for a living quarter, you're potter from a Maikah. How does the Beis Hamikdash have that din? Nobody lived in the Azor, in the Heichel. So why was there chiv of a Maikah? But we know regarding Sukkah, famous discussion about eating in the Sukkah, sleeping in the Sukkah, that what makes a Sukkah the most, when you try to define it as a place of a dior, of a place of living, it goes after the eating. That's the halacha. It's all about the food. It's all about where you have your meal. And therefore, there's the hanafkiminis. That's why there's our minig Chabad is that we don't sleep in the sukkah, but we're makbid much, everything in the sukkah, drink, everything, even water, because it's all about where you're eating. By the Beis Hamikdash, the karbanis were eaten where? In the Beis Hamikdash, in the Hazara. It's the effects of the Shaila, they didn't eat the karbanis in the Heichel. The Rebbe says the halach is that it was kosher to eat in the Heichel. You could have eaten, technically, the karbanis in the Heichel. Comes the question back by the Beis HaKnesses. By a shul, you're allowed to eat bedoichak. A Talmid Chacham is allowed to eat his meal in the Beis in the shul. So that should be a reason why you should be chayav by a shul. But that's the din over there is a derech aday. It has to be specifically a way of temporary, not permanent. A temporary eating is fine in a shul, but a kviyas eating is not allowed. By the Beis Hamikdash, the karbanis had to be eaten in the Beis Hamikdash. Kacha. So that's why there's a chiv of Maikah. To finish off, the Rebbe says the Rabbi Vedas Hashem is that Beis Hamikdash. What is a Maikah? Maikah is to make sure you don't fall from gaiva. Don't fall from gaiva. Hi, gagecho, the roof. So you would think, okay, ich bin, different things, qualities which have nothing to do with kedusha. You could fall from having gaiva. The person has a lot of money, chulu. So that could bring him to gaiva. That's where you have to put a gag. That's where you have to put a maikah. Don't fall in gaiva. But in your Beis Hamikdash, you're in the Kiddush, Heichel. I need to have a mic over there. I need to put a safeguard for a gaiva also over there. Says the Torah, yes. Even in the hechstam, you're in the you're going high. You're flying high in Kachim, in the highest of the high, in the holiest of the holiest. Even over there, you have to put a mic. You have to make sure they don't fall into gaiva. And we should be zoiche to the Vinyan Beis Hamikdash. Beis Hamikdash Shlishi v'Karim Mamish.
Right after my Hashem, there will be a siyum mesechta. Everybody has to stay.